effectively speaking, Samavesha here represents is the essence of your individuality, which yet to be truly acknowledged for what it is, because we are not individuals until our individuality is truly, truly lit. And we are in the possession of that light. We live, as it were, in the in advance of knowing who we are. And we enjoy this individuality. This enjoyment of this individuality in the Bhagavad Gita spoken of as a theft. So the true measure of individuality is only known to us when Samavesha reveals the essence. So the goddess here is the essence of who I am. The essence, even at the level of the manifestation. Samavesha, emotional releases and discernment of energies. It's from Daniel. A bit of a background. Currently, I am undergoing an intense emotional release of despair and sorrow. After the intensity subsides, there is a small background bliss that accompanies the pain, followed by a brief period of intense kriyas. Now I feel taken over or possessed in a more acute way than ever before. In immersions, I feel confident that I am giving myself only to what is in my highest interest. But when I am at home, I wonder how I can be sure that a negative or ill-intentioned entity isn't entering and taking over. This experience did not happen during meditation. I was emotionally triggered in a waking state. There are 3 questions in relation to that. Can Samavesha only be surrendered through meditation, or can it also be dipped in and out of spontaneously and not in a more general waking state? For example, when relaxed, or when a large emotional release is happening or about to happen. How can we discern when we are giving ourselves to the goddess in all her forms, rather than to other, perhaps more negative or ill-intended entities? I realize that all are the goddess, so perhaps some extra context. How do I know if it is not negative or ill-intended entity entering me and taking over? Okay, that's a good one. Very good, relevant question here. So, on the first response to your first question with regard to can Samavesha only be surrendered through meditation, or can it also be dipped in, out of, spontaneously and not in a more of a general waking state? Remember when we spoke about Samavesha as process and Samavesha as a state. So Samavesha as process is what is usually is accompanied by all this display. And Samavesha as a state is how it is traditionally used among the Shaivites, similar to the term Sahaja Samadhi. In other words, simply spontaneous absorption when one goes about one's daily activities, obviously with eyes open in daily interactions. You see, so this Samavesha as process and Samavesha as a state. When Samavesha is as a state, then one enters into Samavesha at any moment in time, irrespective of whether one needs to sit in meditation or not. It's no longer dependent on application of any methods or even giving special occasion. It's literally any otherwise phenomenal activity that requires for mental or physical actions to be performed subsides, one finds oneself in Samavesha. You see? So, yes, when we drive, cook, when we converse, calculate, calibrate, when we do this or that, it's a different kind of activity in consciousness. And it is at the mercy, so to speak, of that what here represents the substratum that falls in the background. But why it is no longer a process and a state is because it's not determined by any outside factor or inside factor that is required to, let's say, go or enter into that state. Again, analogy can be given in let's just give analogy from culture. Let's say give analogy from arts, again, creative processes. It's as if when one needs to enter a certain state in order for the muse to take over, one needs to, let's say, before one can dance fully as fullness of the expression of one's potential, or write, or paint, or play, perform, one needs some kind of transitional phase, whatever that is. Whereas Samavesha as a state is when one no longer requires to enter that creative state, because that creative state no longer interrupted by any phenomenal activity, no matter how mundane. So in other words, one doesn't need to go into special retreat, into special solitude, into special kind of environment, you see, or like being surrounded by artists, when one would be, one's imagination and creative juices are being fed. All this is in relation to spiritual practice, in relation to, let's say, fostering an artist, fostering a true creative being, here analogous, you see? This is sadhana, this is what supports you. But when that is already happening spontaneously, that there is no requirement for that. One always in that state, it's in a natural state. So this is the analogy could be given, so that you know that Samavesha can be experienced in any time. And maybe at first it will be experienced as such, not only through meditation, but when you suddenly find yourself in these moments of when you are not under the necessity or burden to perform something, physically, mentally, right? Now, the third question is with regard to this, how to know when that Samavesha, when that, let's say, taking over, is not by some malignant force. This is where I keep reminding the importance of aligning with the tradition, Sangha, body of spiritual work, is not only a methodology per se. This is why we speak about it now more often than before, although I spoke about it in the very early years, but I made less emphasis, let's say, in the intermediate years, because somehow it began to be taken perversely in some kind of ambivalence entered that somehow it makes us dependent on a community. But I'm fed up and quite frankly no longer have the time to pussyfoot and like pretend. This is why the term kula, the Sanskrit term kula means family. And when it comes to family of awakened beings, that Kula Kundalini is what literally here safeguards one's process. Alignment with particular way where one's practice originates from. You see? You need to have confidence in that. You need to have faith and trust in that. If that trust is violated, whether internally or externally, and you can't protect that trust, then you open, as it were, your ahankaric field from potential, well, crevices where undesirable, let's say, influences can, at more extreme ways, play itself out in a way of how it can simply either deter one or begin to play as an obstacle, let alone in more extreme cases being taken over by negative malignant force. As a side note, I'm planning to do a reflection on what I have recently encountered or came across. There is a documentary on HBO, by HBO, called The Breath of Fire, on the legacy of Yogi Bhajan, the founder of Kundalini Yoga, and the female teacher, Guru Jagat, whom I personally met 3 times and have interacted because we held our programs back in the days at her then newly founded yoga studio called Rama Institute for Applied Sciences on Lincoln Boulevard in Los Angeles. We were literally there the second year she opened that studio. And she showed me around and everything. So I've met her, obviously, interacted and communicated. So I'm planning to do these reflections because I found that documentary to be way too one-sided. Even if I don't necessarily come from the camp of the apologists of the Kundalini Yoga. I've been one of its perhaps most detached critics because I found it to be very strange to have all these practices which have very little to do with the real awakening of Kundalini. But that's beside the point. Why am I bringing this example? Is because the community of Kundalini Yoga practitioners, particularly initiates and those who already facilitate these practices, now faced with this dilemma. You see? Because once the community is thrown into a jeopardy, such as this particular documentary exposes the activity of the organization, its founder, and let's say this aforementioned teacher who tried to revamp and brought it to the next level. She passed away 2 years ago, sadly, Guru Jagat. And I'm giving this only as a side note, okay? So just for you to understand what I'm trying to say here, it's important to have a wholesome understanding with regard to provenance of one's practices, allegiance and alliance one creates with methodologies, through the linked methodologies with the community, percepta, whatever lineage, whatever one understands by that, because this what acts as a safeguarding, insulating layer, you see? So at the gross level, one needs to even create the environment in one's own place where that environment is supported, if one needs to have that support with certain, let's say, effigies and paraphernalia that act as the carriers of this subtle energy and as reminders, you see? Of course, we are rational beings today in the age of liberal democracy. We just want, we want to live like how we want to live life. We want the best of the best, cherry picking. We want to go to the immersion, then come back to our life. Nothing changed. I'm not saying this is you. I'm saying a lot of people think that spiritual methodologies of this kind, of this level, can be done in a way where we cut out, edit out, castrate, forgive me, all that what, let's say, ages gone by known for. No, they're not. They're more important now than ever. Only those of us who have generated tremendous degree, unwavering degree of trust, no longer require that so-called field of protection. But those of us who don't, then don't just discard the possibility of strengthening the field with aforementioned what I call paraphernalia, physical objects, images, effigies, something which connects you with through objects. Any objects that is here, any object I can take from my desk in my room, which is puja room as well, is not just an object. I never treat it as an object. Whether this is, something which is a piece of personal jewelry, or even a cup I drink from, a teapot, let alone the effigy of, let's say, that connection that is established there obviously exists only in one field where that subject-object dynamic is, as it were, in the field of Maya, in the field of that what appears as so-and-so, and recognized on the account of subject recognizes itself in the object. But at the level of this embodiment, whatever is being worshipped, whatever is being considered to be carrying certain subtler qualities, doing exactly that. So I would say to you that even a boulder brought from the walk, I'm not even talking about it to be obsidian or onyx or any precious, semi-precious stone, just a boulder, a piece of brick, forgive me. You relate to that as something sacred, it will begin to emit these vibrations. You see? So maybe I'm kind of departing a little bit too far, but you get the point. You got the point, I hope. If you don't need that, those who don't need that are those who have managed to generate that field within themselves, you see? But in that cooler, in that family, you need to really, in a tantric work, this is proverbial, that connection, you see? I mean, at the gross level, you are supporter of this football team, and that gives you greatness. That team wins, and the whole country, not the whole country, the fans of that team celebrate. You have all cells of your body elated in that moment. It's a phenomenon of collective consciousness. You see? So we are members of clubs, of various clubs. So you need to make sure that you join the club that is to your liking, and you protect the legacy of that club because it becomes your legacy. Other than that, I said many times during our programs that our particular work is known for being diamantine in terms of the protection it gives against any malignant forces, because it's the nature of this work. So if you're steeped in that, if you take it everywhere. And these fears of how do you know if it's not negative or ill-intended entity entering me and taking over? You need to examine this very, very attentively, because this could be due to some kind of doubts, and you need to know where these doubts come from. You see? You need to examine this. So maybe when you next time in the immersion, and you feel like speaking about this in a more intimate manner, I'm all up for it, so that you free yourself from this unwanted, unburden yourself. Yes, when it comes to the power of possession, and Samavesha here, spoken only from the positive connotations that that term carries here. We're not using it, as it were, in its, let's say, polyvalent way of how it can be interpreted. Yes, in the folk level, Samavesha is also related to possession by spirits. And that also means possession can be by dark spirits, negative forces. But it's not with regard to the Samavesha of the archetypal forces that the Shakti here represents in her many-fold forms. Right? Now, the principal forms of Shakti, each of them correspond to the main aspects, right? Either solar, lunar, or electrical, as you remember that, right? Electric. And then there are sub-categories of this, but they represent the whole cosmogony, the whole metaphysical structure of the universe at the level of foundational, like let's say, building blocks. So, how do you protect yourself? Hopefully, with all this being understood, you need to have that unwavering trust, and you build that unwavering trust within. That invincibility. I'm invincible. Literally, as you sit down to meditate, you can say to yourself, I'm invincible. Invincible. Okay? Invincible. You can say that in Sanskrit. Dhruvam. Dhruvam. Dhruvam, that term. Then there is no holding back, and there is no fear that something undesirable can take place. You see? Something, that it kind of, it's like you become, what effectively speaking Samavesha here represents is the essence of your individuality, which yet to be truly acknowledged for what it is, because we are not individuals until our individuality is truly, truly lit. And we are in the possession of that light. We live, as it were, in the advance of knowing who we are. And we enjoy this individuality. This enjoyment of this individuality in the Bhagavad Gita spoken of as a theft. So the true measure of individuality is only known to us when Samavesha reveals the essence. So the goddess here is the essence of who I am. The essence, even at the level of the manifestation.